Today on the show, former Seahawks defensive back, coach, and longtime radio analyst Paul Moyer joins me to give his unique perspective on this young Seahawks secondary that he thinks is as talented as any we've seen here in Seattle. We also look back over Paul's career and reflect on what it took for him to make the roster as an undrafted free agent back in the days when the draft lasted 12 rounds. Paul and I cover a lot of ground in this conversation, so let's get to it. But first, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel so you never miss episodes like this. Seahawks Forever is up next.
Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
Welcome back to the show, everybody. I know we're in the heart of it. We're in the dog days of the off season. You're all scattering. You're all going on vacation. You're getting ready for the 4th, and training camp's still 4 full weeks away. So we're running out of things to talk about, right? But we're not running out of people to talk about. And as I have been promising, former Seahawks player, coach, analyst, broadcaster, Paul Moyer, joining me from his offices on First Hill in Seattle. Paul, thank you so much for doing this and joining me on the show today.
Thanks, Dan. I appreciate you having me. And look, there's always something to talk about with the Seahawks. So it
is what makes the NFL special. It is truly 365. I was talking to Corbin Smith today, who covers the team, and with the NHL draft happening today, the entry level draft, and baseball does it too, where their draft precedes free agency. And he was talking about that concept. And ultimately we decided that it wouldn't work because it would take away that 4 or 5 months of draft speculation that kind of fuels all the offseason talk and makes it so much fun for fans and analysts and guys like yourself. So we need it. We crave it. And that's why we're here doing it.
Yeah. You mentioned camp's about a month, actually less than a month away.
Yeah.
No, it's right about a month away. It's always been around my birthday. And it was, July 26th, my birthday, and camp always started the day of or the day after.
Mm-hmm.
So it was one of those. I remember it was going home. I'd always go home the last 2 weeks down to California where I grew up, and always missed, my birthday, and said, okay, but that was my time to get ready because I wasn't going to see my friends and family for about 5 weeks because that's what camp was like back in the old days.
Yeah. I want to start in the old days. Let's go back to your first training camp. So you have your birthday. You didn't know for sure that you were going to be leaving for 5 weeks that year. You were undrafted. And back then, I think people forget, the draft was 12 rounds at that time.
Yeah.
What do you remember most about your approach heading into that training camp, knowing that you're about to go play for one of the most hard-nosed, old-school, throwback, kind of veteran-leaning head coach in Chuck Knox? You knew the odds were stacked against you. Talk a little bit about the mindset that you had going into that camp trying to make that roster.
Well, I still remember it. It's actually 40 years this year, which is kind of weird because I think it's my 40th year doing something with the Seahawks, either player, coach, broadcasting. Back then, we had mini camps, and they would bring in a lot of rookies. I was obviously a little surprised I wasn't drafted. I mean, I was on the #1 defense in the country at Arizona State. I had a 3-time All-American safety next to me, but I definitely outplayed him. I was the MVP of the East-West Shrine game. I was a little shocked. But the way the world was back then, they didn't really have the combines like they do today. And if you got pigeonholed from the year before, with your 40 time, which I was hurt in my junior year, it was hard to get that off. So with all that being said, I knew Chuck Knox growing up in Orange County. I was a big LA Ram fan before he went off to Buffalo. And so when I was signed as a free agent, and there was, it's just like today, there's a lot of teams will go after the undrafted, particularly pretty good players that were undrafted. You get it's actually you're in a better position than being drafted late. The one thing I knew was they didn't really have a lot of backups. They had a guy named Don Dufek, who I just saw at Mike Tice's charity event past weekend. Hadn't seen him in about 30 years. And then they had another guy named McMillan. I can't remember his first name, but I had actually watched them, and I said, okay. And they had said, look, you have a legitimate chance to make this team. So that was part of why I signed. My defensive coordinator at Arizona State was the defensive line coach, so he knew me as well. So there was a little bit of history on that. But once I got here, because of the mini camps, and then I stayed the whole summer, I was pretty confident I was going to make the team. I mean, I definitely thought I was the third best safety behind John Harris and Kenny Easley. Mm-hmm. But you never know. Obviously, you go into it. I had a pretty good camp. I knew I was going to make the team, though, at that point. Yeah. So no surprises, but definitely like a lot of guys who are free agents, and there's a long history of it here with the Seahawks. You know, you have a chip on your shoulder, and I was one of them.
Yeah, and went on to be, I don't know, I guess we could say the second best player from that draft class, right? You look at that class as a whole, and the Seahawks take Curt Warner at number 3. Yeah. You end up playing 98 games in your career. Nobody else that was drafted that year played more than, I think Sam Merriman played 71 games. Yeah. It was basically you and Curt were the stars of that draft class, or rookie class, as you will. You mentioned it. The Seahawks have had tremendous success every single year. One, if not multiple, undrafted free agents make the roster. Your experience being around the organization, why have they been so successful at cultivating that resource?
Well, that's a good question, because I'm not sure it came from, when I was there, it definitely was a culture. And I think a lot of it had to do with Rusty Tillman. Russ Tillman was our great special team coach, rest in peace, my friend there, who passed away about a year ago on us. So there was definitely a focal point for that. And, you can only, back then, the special teams were a huge part of it. It's much more than it is today. I mean, they're really taking special teams out. So, and I think there was because they came from an expansion draft where, they had to go get a bunch of players, and you brought in 100 players back then, 120 guys, because you had 3 a days over in Cheney, and you just got an opportunity. And it just goes to show you there's no complete science to drafting players. There's a lot of really good football players who don't get drafted and end up making the NFL. And I just think the Seahawks, they started that. And then after that, I think it's just, sometimes it's pure luck. Sometimes it's your scouting team. One of the few pictures I have in my office, you mentioned, and there's Curt Warner right there. Yeah. I don't know if that was our rookie year or second year, but yeah, Curt and I became roommates there, and we gave up a lot to get him, to move to that spot. So that's why we didn't have and Curt and I have been really best friends ever since. So that was, you're right. There wasn't a lot of us who made the team.
I want to ask you about that. It's such a focal point of debate, especially in the analytical community these days. Using resources on running backs. Nobody wants to pay him anymore. You got guys like Dalvin Cook being cut in the prime of their careers. Anyone who drafts a running back high gets reamed in the media, especially among the analytical community. Nobody more so than the Seahawks the last 2 years for investing second-round picks back-to-back years. I'd like to know your thoughts on kind of the current valuation of the running back position when it comes to that, because you saw firsthand a team give up tremendous draft resources to move up to take a running back at 3, but you also saw that player with a tremendous individual performances rookie year transform that offense. You saw that firsthand. So how does that affect your view of kind of what's happening in that area?
Well, there's a lot of those analysts on the draft that, I would love to have conversations with. Each team, it's about what they value. I get if you take it as a whole. All right, we're just going to put every team in a basket, and we're going to take the analytics of the value of a running back. I get it. But go show me a really good football team that doesn't have a great running back. Mm-hmm. I mean, there are not very many of them. And then, I even look at Tennessee. I mean, what does Henry mean to them? Yeah. Everything. Yeah. What does running backs mean to the Seahawks? Everything, because it's built around their offense. I get Kansas City, but even Kansas City has a good running back. There's just not a running back. I mean, he's a wide receiver out of the backfield, and they use them differently. So you can make a lot of money as a running back, but you better be able to catch, 50, 60 footballs, as well as the running game. And I think the biggest thing is just the injury part of it. You cannot invest that much into it. They're going to carry it 20 to 30 times a game, which is rare nowadays. They try to limit that. With now 17 games, the injury factor for those guys and missing games is huge. And I do think you can go find a lot of good running backs in the second to, seventh round. You can find some. I mean, we got 2 of them this year. I think are going to compete hard for playing time. Because I certainly don't want, K9 having to take 25 snaps running the football. He's just not big enough. So I think the value of running back's huge. Dave Wyman, you hear him, he thinks that. The Seahawks obviously do. But again, if we put him in a basket, I get it. The pundits are going to dog that. But it's obviously worked out. I think they're having a harder time dogging the Seahawks draft over the last 2 years.
Maybe they're just looking for some sort of Achilles heel. It does seem like the Seahawks take more heat in that area and other organizations get a pass. Like, I feel like the Detroit Lions are getting a pass for taking Gibbs at 12. And I don't know, it just seems to be a Seahawk thing. But certainly they've been hit by the injury bug as much as anyone. They had so much on Chris Carson's shoulders, Rashad Penny's shoulders. We saw what happened there. Yeah, I'm with you. Love this running back room and don't mind. But I'm a best player available guy. Just take good players and figure it out later. And it seems like at least these last 2 drafts, that's kind of been the focus for them.
Yeah, no question.
Before we talk a little bit more about this current roster, I want to go back a little bit, just one last time to your playing career. 1988 was a fantastic year. It was your best year. You started all 16 games, 6 interceptions, 2 fumble recoveries. The team went 9-7, won the AFC West. Some of the younger fans right now might be, Googling right now to make sure I didn't just make a mistake in saying that. Lose to the Bengals in the first round of the playoffs that year. What memory stands out the most to you about that particular season?
Well, that was the first year without Kenny Easley. And, he was definitely the leader, at least physical leader of our team for so many years. And, I replaced him. So I remember that, obviously. And Kenny and I were really good friends. So that was a tough one. And we talked about it before it actually happened. It was an up and down year as well. We started off hot. I think we won our first 2 games against Denver. And I don't remember who the next game. But I think we were 2-0. And then I think it was Kansas City. Then we come up against the 49ers, and they've got their world-class team who won the Super Bowl that year, and we were like number 2 in defense going into that game. I think we came out, we were like 30th. It was one of the biggest games. So it was just an up and down year where we played really well at times, and then we would lay an egg. It was just a really inconsistent year, but we had playmakers and made a lot of plays when need be. And we probably should have beat Cincinnati. Remember, we should have beat Cincinnati on the road. They were the number 1 team, I think, in the AFC that year. We fumbled twice inside their 10-yard line going in to score. Twice. And that, we ended up losing by 8 points, I think, maybe whatever the score was. Yeah. So I just remember that. For me personally, it was fun. I always wanted to start, but, you sit behind Kenny Easley, you're definitely going to bide your time. But I played a lot. I think I started over 30 games in my career just because Kenny had been hurt. I know that I was pretty productive when I did get an opportunity, at least, interceptions and stuff. Yeah. So it was fun. We had a good team. We were getting a little old in the tooth there. Some of our best players, we had Steve Largent and Jacob Green, and we had lost Kenny Easley. And so some of our stars were just starting to get past their prime. But it was fun. It was the first AFC West championship in Seahawks history, or a banner, I guess. Yeah, it was pretty memorable for us.
Are you excited about the throwback unis from that era coming back?
First of all, I love those uniforms, and to retrofit, maybe retrofit's not the right, to modernize them, what they've mocked up. If that's what is actually going to come out, I think the game's going to be against Cleveland. Yeah. I think they're the best looking uniforms in the league. I kind of like the ones now. I have to say that because I work for the Seahawks.
Sure.
I do like them, but that uniform that they're going to bring in November is special. And I've had so many people say the same thing. If that was the uniform, they'd be buying jerseys all day long.
Yeah, I'm with you. At the time, I don't think I appreciated them, but it was a different time back then. Shoulder pads were bigger, guys wore neck rolls, the sleeves were loose, right? But like you said, the new tight fitting, nobody wears pads anymore. I've seen some of those like Photoshop things too, and it's gonna be pretty amazing. They're gonna sell a lot of merchandise, I'll tell you that. But when people buy number 21 jerseys, it's going to have the name Witherspoon on the back of them for the most part.
Yeah.
I am hoping that they'll have a customizable option for the throwback jerseys.
Yes.
I think that would be fun.
We'll make that happen.
We'll mix a few Moyers in with the Witherspoons. I want to talk about those young guys because this collection of talent in the secondary right now, people like to toss around the Legion of Boom thing. I think it got kind of to an annoying level the last 4 or 5 years because especially the national guys, they just have nothing else to reference when talking about the Seahawks. But as far as pure talent goes, this collection of guys, how excited are you to see them come together on the field?
Yeah, it's going to be fun. And I think you hit the right word. It's talent. I'd argue my group was the best group of safeties in Seahawks history. You got Kenny Easley. You had Dave Brown. Dave Brown has 63 interceptions. Yeah. 63. You could throw Earl Thomas and Sherman together, and they don't touch that number.
Yeah.
At least I don't think. Maybe they're close. Kenny Easley, who was the most dominant safety at that time. You could put him and Ronnie Lott in there, but they were different type of players. And if Kenny had played, a full career, more than the 7 seasons that he did, he would have been even more of a folklore on that. So I would argue in that just because we had so many playmakers. John Harris, smartest football player I've ever been around. He has over 30 interceptions. Keith Simpson, and even a little, scrub like me, had double-digit interceptions. I don't know if I have more than Cam Chancellor, but I think I'm close. My point is the Legion of Boom won a Super Bowl. Yeah, really good players. Earl, again, and Sherm, what he did, and Cam Chancellor. This group has a chance to be the most athletic group because when you look at Woolen, a lot of people want to compare him to Sherman. He is not as good as Sherman yet. He had a good year. He had those interceptions, and it was a complete surprise. But he has a long way to go to be truly an elite corner. And he's got to work still on his footwork, his jams. He's still got some pattern recognition things. But boy, that speed, that closing speed, that length he has makes him very unique. And then throwing Witherspoon, we got to see how that develops. But I sure like him on tape. And we can play him a lot of different places. We don't have to just play him on the outside. I expect him actually to push a little bit in that nickel spot. They kind of did that a little bit in the OTAs by accident. And I think they'd like to have him outside. But in the running game last year where everybody said, we got to beef up the defensive line for the running game, which I agree. But we got hurt more on the perimeter than we did up the middle. And a lot of people don't realize that. And it came a lot with San Francisco with fly sweeps and the way they bring in 3 tight ends. And they were forcing our corners, particularly Woolen, to have to play the run. And he didn't play it that great. Again, he's got to make some improvement there. You throw in Witherspoon now, it's not just in the passing game. I think he helps our running game as well. And then throw in Love. Love's going to be a guy that's going to compete in a lot of areas. If we can get Jamal Adams healthy, Diggs needs to play a little better. I thought he took a little step back last year. But as a group, they got potential. Now they got to go out and prove it. But I am excited.
Well, looking back over your coaching career, it struck me that, and I'd forgotten, time goes by, the continuity that you had as a DB coach in Seattle. You basically had the same group almost all 4 years. You certainly at corner with Patrick Hunter and Dwayne Harper, basically 4 years in a row. So as a coach, that affords you a lot of comfort knowing that those guys, they know each other. How long does it take a young group like this to gel? Prepare us for the fact that we might see some early season growing pains.
Well, I think you saw it last year with Wool, and you saw it a little bit with Kobe Bryant. He got better as the year went. You go back 2 years ago when Trey Brown, who I actually think was going to be a really good corner before his knee injury, and I'm still optimistic he's going to push. I'm not sure what happened last year, why he didn't push as hard towards the end of the year. I think it depends, Dan, because when I was playing, and we ran what I thought was one of the most sophisticated defenses in the passing game in the NFL, because we did a lot of combination, 3-on-2. Guy cuts in, you jump him, the other guy's over the top. And so that's why we set an NFL record for most turnovers in 1984. We had really smart guys who were talented, but it was a really complicated defense. It took a couple of years for us to get it mastered. Man, if you go back to 83, Chuck Knox's first year with our defense, it took us to the end of the year before we really got it figured out, started becoming a good defense. 1984 would become a dominant defense. So the reason why I say it depends is you just don't have that much time to run the type of defenses we ran back then.
Yeah.
We don't have enough time on the field with these guys, not enough practices. I mean, we literally had 3 practices during camp. They have one for less than 2 hours. So you got to do a lot of film study. If they keep it simple and let them just play, I think they'll be fine because you'll see their athletic ability. But it is a learning curve, and they are going to have to communicate. And that has been the issue the last 2 years, is just the communication issues, the breakdowns, giving up big plays, big runs. And I look at big plays as that is a secondary responsibility in the running game and in the passing game.
No.
So not to tamp down the expectations too much, because I think we're going to be very good. But you're right. It takes time to really trust. That's the word. Trust each other that you're going to do your job.
Now I want to ask you about, through the eyes of a guy who played defensive back, coaches defensive back, sees the game that way. When you go to OTAs and mini camp and you see this group of receivers that the Seahawks has now, just give me your thoughts on those 3 guys and JSN, what you've seen out of him and adding him to the mix and what that affords Geno Smith when he gets out there and he's in 3rd and long and he needs an outlet. It's hard to not get excited about that group.
Yeah, I think I was reading about our 3rd down conversions. There's a couple articles today on the local channel. I think actually 710 Seattle wrote one. And one of them was, we haven't been top 10 offensively in 3rd down since 2015. And I've said the biggest issue with the Seahawks on 3rd downs is when we lost Doug Baldwin. Doug was almost impossible to stop off the line. He's the best release guy I've seen. I mean, one of the best I've ever seen. Made people look silly. And 3rd down and 7, 3rd down and 8, that really is a one-on-one situation. And it's the quickest throw for the quarterback. We haven't had that. And again, I think Jackson comes in and solidifies that immediately, though I know D. Eskridge is getting a lot of love right now. They feel like he's kind of like Kelnick in baseball, that there's something different about this offseason. He's going to compete. So I'm excited because we haven't had a good slot receiver since Baldwin's been gone. So now let's throw those 3 together. I've never been around a team that's had 3 wide receivers like them. I've always seen 1, maybe 2, been an athlete. But you have, obviously DK that's special. Tyler, who's probably the best route runner, in the last 15 years got to throw Doug Baldwin in there too. We've had some good ones, Steve Largent, but Tyler's special. And now, again, we're throwing a rookie that seems farther ahead, but it's hard to see in the OTAs what you're actually going to get. But I'm really excited. It's just a weapon that I think frees up DK and Tyler more. It's going to give them more opportunities for big plays.
You've been around Pete Carroll now for a number of years, and I'm fascinated by the contrast of his style and approach and the guys that you played and coached for. We talked about Chuck Knox. Tom Flores, also a very no-nonsense guy, right? When Pete first came into the league, he had a lot of detractors. I'll never forget the piece that Jeffrey Chadia wrote for ESPN when he was hired. The day after he was hired, said it'll never work. That rah-rah college mentality will never work. He'll be out of the league before his contract's over. What is it that you see from Pete on a day in, day out basis being around him that makes his approach work?
Well, I think you're right. I mean, when they hired Pete, I was a doubter at first too, because they fired, Jim Moore. Jim was a friend.
Yeah.
And, I didn't like the way it went down, even though best decision the Seahawks probably have ever made. I think, Pete's big into psychology. When I was with Chuck, Chuck was like the Mona Lisa, and he wore his hat down here, and he would stand off, and every player on the team thought he was looking at them. And it didn't matter where he was. You always thought his eyes were on you. And I talk about this with other players. And he commanded respect. When he walked in the room, the room went quiet. He was kind of like, I'm not kind of the Herb Brooks thing. I'll be your coach, but I'm not your friend. And, there's other guys for that he had to do that. Pete is about people. X's and O's are important. And he does have a philosophy, and he's a fantastic coach. And he doesn't probably get enough credit for that. People think, oh, he's rah-rah. He's just an emotional guy. He's more of a psychologist. Well, no, that's not it at all. It's the time he puts into it. It's a consistency. And I think what Pete does probably better than any coach I've been around is he just finds a way to get the best out of people. And sometimes it is that pat on the back. And I think most people respond better when they're being praised. And you live in this box, and we're going to praise you for these great plays, and we'll correct you on the bad ones. The old school way was we're going to punish you for those bad plays, and our expectations are the good plays. So when you went into a film room, ours wasn't tell the truth Monday. It was brutal, especially after a loss. No one wanted to go into film room on Monday. Whereas here, these guys are encouraged to make plays, and they're going to bring out that. So it's just it's a different vibe. And I think Pete's the best. The other thing is you can't fake it. Pete has that energy. That's real. It never wavers. And so there's so much to Pete that I could talk hours about on him. I think his X's and O's are vastly underrated. He's a very good coach. He hires good coaches. The expectations are there. There's accountability. People say there's no accountability. No, there's accountability in that group. It's about competing. But I think the psychology of it, and just look at the players. The players may go out hurt because they're used to being this great organization and loved, and it hurts to be. We no longer need you. It's not personal, but they take it personal because most players are still young, right? They're in their late 20s, early 30s. My God, we're just learning to become men at that point.
Yeah.
Then they realize it, and then they come back, and they all talk well about Pete. So Pete's a special guy.
It's an interesting perspective. I've always kind of viewed him as a parental figure, because we all think, when we're growing up, we all think that our parents are idiots and they don't know and they're too hard on us or whatever. And then we grow up one day and we wake up and we realize, oh, I am who I am because of them. And you make a great point. Michael Bennett, Luke Wilson, talking on KJ Wright's podcast last week, had some amazing things to say about how he wasn't too happy about how some things went down, but now he sees how great that environment was. You mentioned expectations. Let's finish on that note. This is such a young roster, talented roster. It's a fun roster. Can't wait to see it on the field. Are we a year away from a roster that can really truly contend? The expectations are rising by the day, it seems like, for this team. But realistically, what can we expect out of this young roster?
Well, I think realistically, we can be a better team next year. We should beat the Rams and the Cardinals both games. To me, there's 4 wins right then. You played close to 500. I know it's an odd number of games now, but you play close to 500, you're in the playoffs. And a lot depends on, does Geno do what he did last year? Mm-hmm. I think he's going to be better. I think our offensive line is going to be better. I don't know a position we're not going to be better. And the reason why I say that is, to me, DK is still on the upswing. Our running backs on the upswing. Our tight ends are all young. Our whole offensive line is young and going to get better. Let's look at the defense. Same thing across the board. I don't think Bobby Wagner is necessarily going to be better, but I think he brings in some stability. Let's look at corners. So I look at it every position, and I think Geno Smith is first time really starting for a full season in 10 years. He's absolutely going to be better because he's a really young 32, maybe he's 33 now, year old. So I think the expectations are there, but the teams ahead of us are still really good. San Francisco, their defensive line they're a juggernaut. Their weapons they have offensively, it's a complicated offense to to defend. You got to have really smart players, not just smart, but you got to have athletes to match up with it. Do we make that jump? So I think at the end of the year, the last four, I'm looking by quarter. First quarter, we should be pretty good. I just need to see us to get a little bit better each quarter. And then that last, 3-4 games, are we playing in a position to actually make a run at this thing? But I wouldn't be surprised if we pushed San Francisco hard this year, and a lot's going to do with injuries. But you got to love this young team and the upside and us getting better.
Well, you'll be able to hear Paul's continued analysis. He makes regular appearances on Seattle Sports 710. You can hear him there. And then, of course, the pre and the post-game show on the radio broadcast as well. Paul, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And hopefully we can do this again soon.
Anytime, Dan. Appreciate you. Have a great 4th, by the way.
Follow me on Twitter at Seahawks Forever and subscribe to the YouTube channel so you always get notification of new episodes. Until next time, this is Seahawks Forever, forever and always. Go Hawks.